found that will magically put your brain into a state of plasticity? And the answer is yes, such plants exist, but what's missing is the focus component. If that work is not done with a particular end goal in mind, you'll get plasticity, but you'll get plasticity in a kind of across the board. It's like learning a little bit of 9 languages all at once is not gonna make you speak coherently in any one of them. So focus is the key.
Right. I mean, this idea of flow is so much in the vernacular now. And, you know, my sense is that people are trying to measure their level of engagement against some sort of theoretical idea of what it's like to be in that flow state. And if they're not experiencing it, they feel like they're doing it wrong, or they feel guilty, or they beat themselves up. And for me, a lot of it is just hard work. Like right now, I'm trying to finish this book. And I should have been working on this book for like the last 9 months, right? And I just couldn't get it together. Like it's a collaborative project, so there's a lot of different people that are involved in this. And they've been working diligently, sort of daily, you know, putting this thing together. And I've just been focusing on the podcast and been unable to immerse myself in this project, because I know from past book projects, when I go all in, like the addict in me kicks in, and it's like, it just becomes my universe. And I've been completely paralyzed from taking that on. And so I've dithered away most of the quarantine without being productive on this project. And then about 10 days ago, we had a meeting and we established this deadline at, you know, July 10th to turn this thing in. And it was like a switch got flicked and I went all in, and it's all I can think about now. And in fact, everything else feels like extraneous and a distraction. I just want to get back so I can focus on this thing. And 10 days ago, I couldn't get myself into that position. And it's made me think about like what is going on in my brain that, you know, it's such a drastic state change. And what did I do to switch that? Well, a deadline was imposed upon me, and whatever happened neurochemically with that set in motion like a chain reaction of events that got me into the chair. And once I began the project, for me, it's all about like momentum, right? It's like getting to the starting line and beginning is so hard. Like I will just go forever without doing it. And then I'm in, and then I'm all in 110%. And I'm like, why can't I be that person who just worked on it, you know, an hour and a half every day for the last 3 months?
Well, I can offer some potential explanations. I can relate.
And none of it involves a flow state.
Right.
It's all hard.
Yeah, and you know, I'm friends with Steven Kotler. I think flow, and I think the Csikszentmihalyi, who originated this thing of flow, is really interesting. But I say right now, the most we can say about flow mechanistically is backwards, it spells wolf. We don't really understand flow. Now, people have come up with these theories. It's like hyperfrontality. I haven't seen the data, and I'm not picking on anybody. I'm putting that out there as a prompt for people to discover this. I think that, and to work on it. I think it's a really interesting, highly desirable state, but I think we need to get comfortable as a culture in trying to understand our species and how we work, that the early stages of hard work and focus are gonna feel like agitation, stress, and confusion, because that's the norepinephrine and adrenaline system kicking in. None of us would expect to walk into the gym and do our PR lift, or, you know, a performer go do something without warming up. The brain also needs to warm up and start to hone in which circuits are gonna be active. And it's unreasonable for us to think, oh, I've got an hour, I'm gonna plop down and write beautifully for an hour, my best work. We need to accept that there's a period of agitation and stress that accompanies the dropping into these highly concentrated states. Now, in terms of the reward that accompanies the feeling that we're funneling into that groove of being productive in one regime, like for you writing this book, the dopamine system is really important to understand. So we've talked about norepinephrine kind of gets you going. Acetylcholine is the spotlight of attention. The dopamine system is Mother Nature's hardwired ancient system in all animals, including humans, to put us on the right path. Now, a lot of people talk about dopamine as this thing that you get when you publish the book, or when you get the book deal, or when something wonderful happens, like your child's born, and that's true. But dopamine's main role is to be released anytime you achieve a milestone or you think you're on the right path. And when the dopamine system is tethered to a particular pattern of focus, remember duration, path, and outcome. So it's like, okay, you sit down, maybe you don't get much text out, but then the next day you get 800 words of really solid text and you feel good. You're like, I'm into this. What does that dopamine system do? The dopamine system takes the norepinephrine, which is normally rate limiting, like at some point, there's so much norepinephrine that you quit, and we can talk about that. It's actually the substrate for quitting. Dopamine can push that noradrenaline back down, and give you more room, more space to do duration, path, and outcome work, highly focused work. And I'm making duration, path, outcome synonymous with highly focused work. Why would this happen? So let's think about an animal. Let's think about a deer that wakes up and is thirsty, and it's wandering out looking for water. That animal needs water. It doesn't know that it needs water. It experiences agitation. The same way that a baby feels agitation when it wants food, but it doesn't know it needs food. It just feels agitation and cries, and the caretaker comes, hopefully. That deer is now foraging for something that it needs. And let's say it smells water, because deer can actually do that, and arrives at a stream and takes a sip of water. There's dopamine release then that puts it on a path to maybe a larger lake or something of that sort, or to be able to go achieve food. So when we are on the right path and we hit a milestone, dopamine is released, and it tends to tighten our focus more for that activity. So the dopamine, this is why drugs of abuse and why alcoholism and some process addictions, which are behavioral addictions, are so dangerous, because a lot of those drugs of abuse are dopamine. So it becomes this cyclical loop where there's no other behavior that can evoke the same level of release.
Right.
In fact, I sort of define addiction as a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. And I say that because it really is the way that the dopamine system works. Normally, the dopamine system is designed to be generic. It's designed to get me to do lots of things, social interactions, work, exercise, all those things. Just like the stress system is designed to get me out of bed in the morning, a cortisol pulse is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's also what led me to pursue a career in science out of fear initially, and eventually pleasure. So the dopamine system is tethered to those states of focus. And it's what Mother Nature designed so that the neural plasticity would occur and you would want to continue those behaviors again in the future. That deer needs to know and remember and create a memory, not just of where that stream is, but the process of, when I feel that agitation, I'm gonna get up and go down this particular path.
Right.
And so people think of the dopamine system as this kind of like catch-all for reward. Oh, you get likes on Instagram and it makes you feel good. That's not really how it works. And the important thing to understand is when you start getting a convergence of norepinephrine, so that level of agitation, duration, path, outcome, acetylcholine, and dopamine, now you're starting to wire in the behaviors that make people really good at certain things. Now, in a functional view of this, so not addiction, what this means is that for any of us, success in any endeavor is very closely related to how much focus we can bring to that endeavor. And the reward system, you start to realize, is entirely internal. No one's coming along and cramming dopamine in your ear or dripping it in your brain. It's all internal. And this starts to bring us into the kind of like discussion around mindsets. Because so my colleague Carol Dweck, who popularized this theme, growth mindset, it's again a very misunderstood concept. It's the idea that we can change, so that's built into that. But the discovery of growth mindset was of these kids that actually really enjoyed doing problem sets that they knew they couldn't get right. But for them, they would get this like dopamine release from just focusing on the problem. They liked doing puzzles they couldn't get right. It sounds crazy, but inevitably those kids are very good at puzzles and very good at math and these kinds of things. So growth mindset is, I believe, if a sort of a neuroscience lens on growth mindset would be that the agitation and stress that you feel at the beginning of something and when you're trying to lean into it and you can't focus is just a recognized gate. You have to pass through that gate to get to the focus component. And then if you can reward the effort process, you really start to feel joy and low levels of excitement in the effort process. That's that buffering of adrenaline. That's that feeling like, yes, I've got a lot of adrenaline in my system, but I'm on the right path. It feels good to walk up this hill, so to speak. And when you start to bring those neural circuits together, you really start to create a whole set of circuits that are designed to be exported to any behavior you want. So if it's writing a book, great. If it's podcasting, great. If it's building a business, great. If it's building a terrific relationship, great. Then the circuits that Mother Nature has designed are incredibly generic so that we could adapt to whatever it is that we need to do. And I think the misunderstanding around how these circuits work has led to this idea that there's some secret entry point, maybe marked flow on the door, and there's a trampoline up to that door, and you just open that door and you're going to be in it.
Right.
And nothing could be further from the truth. And anyone who's done well in any career or athletic pursuit knows this, but unfortunately, there's a kind of obsession with the idea that it's all supposed to feel good. And it does feel good, but there's a whole staircase in which it feels kind of lousy.
Yeah, I mean, the feel good aspect of that experience is very subtle. And I think, in a kind of global way, what you're talking about is falling in love with the process. Like, you have to push this gate open, which might require, more effort than you're comfortable with. But once you push through, it is about, the daily rigor and the tiny wins that you get from that, rather than, it's easy to, you set a goal, but that goal becomes very abstract, right? And it's those tiny little things that you're getting done every day that bring you that internal satisfaction, that are like calibrating that plasticity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's incredible is the extent to which the mind and thoughts, remember earlier we were talking about how thoughts are spontaneous? You can't control them. Negative thoughts, traumatic thoughts, bad thoughts, trying to suppress those is futile. If there's one message I can send people, it's just don't even work at that, but work at the process of introducing thoughts as almost like you would introduce actions, because we can introduce thoughts. And Carol Dweck has talked about this, that positive self-talk is not the same thing as growth mindset, because positive self-talk is almost always linked to the ultimate outcome. If I'm losing badly in something and I tell myself I'm doing great, I know that I'm lying.
Yeah,
there's no dopamine release from that. And, a lot of the self-help wellness culture of the 80s and 90s was like, it's impossible to be in a bad mood if you're smiling. We wouldn't have any depression on the planet if that's true. There's probably some feedback from the face to the brain, but it's not that simple. But the idea that you can self-reward the effort process is extremely powerful, because what it means is that if you can recognize agitation, stress, and confusion as an entry point to where you eventually want to go, I do think that even just mental recognition can allow people to pass through it more easily. They think they're doing something wrong. And then rewarding yourself when you achieve any milestone, like, running to a particular location if you're trying to run a long distance, and then registering that as a partial win. What we know is that the dopamine that's released in response to that suppresses the total amount of adrenaline and gives you more room, more time, more energy to run. In the running example. And this is anchored in a real scientific result. So last year there was a paper published that essentially was asking why any human or animal quits at any behavior. Now, certain behaviors, like I can't lift a car unless it's a very small car. I can't lift a car. But if we're talking about running, or we're talking about long bouts of work, the question is, why do we quit? Like, what is that? And it turns out that every time we exert effort, a certain amount of noradrenaline in the brain is released. And there's a sort of a counter in the brainstem. And at some point, enough noradrenaline is released and it shuts down cognitive control, deliberate control over the motor circuitry, and we quit. That's it. But the thing that can restore those levels, or can sort of reset those levels lower and give us more gas, more mileage, is dopamine. And it makes perfect sense, because our species had to move against very challenging things in nature and in terms of in culture at every stage of our evolution, including now. 2020 is a good example of this. And when a good example would be, if you're really slogging it out and things are miserable, just think like the worst family vacation, everything is a disaster, or a very hard physical event, and someone cracks a joke, you almost immediately feel a sense of relief. You see this in the team that wins the Super Bowl. Both teams slogged it out. You have to believe they were both at max effort the entire game. Look at the team that wins. They have extra energy. They're jumping all over the place. So it can't be physical energy. It can't be glycogen related. It's not ketone related. It's nothing in the body in that sense. It's dopamine's ability to take that level of norepinephrine and smack it back down. And so we can learn this, right? I mean, I think this is where there's real power, like in your story, or the story that I'm familiar with from your book, like the ability to push through those pain points is something that we really can export to other aspects of life because it's the same neurochemicals that are involved. So when you get to a particular location, or maybe I recall, a portion where you're feeling lousy, you're injured or you feel like you're hurt, and you can reframe it mentally and think, I'm actually still on the ladder. I'm still holding on to a rung. I know at least that much. I'm still breathing. I know that much. And the lift that we get is not some psychological pump up. It's a neurochemical thing. It's dopamine suppressing norepinephrine and saying, you're on the right path. You can keep going. It's a permission to keep going. And we grant that permission to ourselves. No one grants that permission to us. I think one of the other kind of misconceptions that we want to dissolve is this idea that external rewards can actually propel us down long paths of success and high performance. They can't.
No, that's
internal
an unsustainable fuel source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend from the SEAL teams, and somebody asked us recently, we were given a talk, and somebody said, how can I make sure that I continue to self-reward and I'm not driven by these external rewards? How can I continue to have that drive? And his answer was very good. He said, give away all the external rewards. Now, not everyone can afford to do that.
It's just about you and you.
It's just you and you. And the more attached, there's a famous Stanford study done at Bing Nursery School, probably not far from where you were in the dormitory. There's a little nursery school in Escondido Village. And they did this study where they looked at kids that liked to playing during their recess. It's all recess in nursery school, but they're drawing. And they took the kids that really like to draw, and they started giving them little gold stars on their drawings. And then they like the gold stars for a kid, that's an extrinsic reward. And then they stopped doing that. And the kids stopped drawing. They associated the good feeling of doing it with the external rewards.
Right.
We have to be very cautious about how much of our internal dopamine we attach to external rewards if we want to continue to grow and pursue and focus and work hard. If you just want to get to some place and cash in, then fine. But most people find themselves in a pretty miserable place because their dopamine was so attached to external rewards, they need more and more of that.
Well, the why has to be deeper than that. I mean, the thing that I kind of always default to when I hit that breaking point, or I'm training or I'm racing or whatever, and I'm at that stage where